Black tie donors, defense contractors shaking hands under giant American flags. Olivia moved quietly between tables in a simple black catering uniform, tray balanced steady in her hands. Blonde hair tied back, eyes calm, invisible, the way staff usually are. That's when the billionaire at table 7 snapped his fingers. "Hey, refill my drink, bitch." A few men laughed. He didn't even look at her when he shoved the empty glass toward her chest. When she didn't move fast enough, he grabbed her wrist. "Don't stand there. You work for me tonight." Across the room, a chair scraped loudly against marble. A decorated SEAL Admiral slowly stood up, and when he saw her face, he went completely still. Because the woman holding that tray was supposed to be buried 15 years ago. Before we start, if you believe no one is above the law, comment where you're watching from and subscribe. Because tonight's story proves that some of the strongest people in a room are the ones nobody notices. The ballroom looked like something out of a magazine. Crystal chandeliers hanging low over polished marble floors. Waitstaff in black uniforms moving in careful lines. American flags standing tall behind a stage where a banner read, "Veterans Defense Initiative Annual Gala." The guest list was heavy with power. Retired generals, senators, defense contractors, and a handful of billionaires who funded half the technology in the room. Olivia moved quietly between the tables, tray balanced at shoulder height, posture straight, but relaxed. Her blonde hair was tied back neatly. No jewelry, no attention-seeking, just steady steps and controlled breathing. She wasn't there to be seen. She was there to work. Most of the guests barely registered her presence, but one man at table 7 did. He was loud from the moment he arrived. Mid-50s, expensive watch, the kind of voice that carried even when it didn't need to. A tech billionaire who'd made his fortune on defense software and liked to remind people of it. He laughed too hard at his own jokes and clapped men on the back like they were employees instead of equals. Olivia approached with a tray of refilled glasses, placing them down one by one without interruption. The billionaire didn't look at her when he lifted his empty tumbler and held it out sideways. "Hey," he said casually, like he was calling for a dog. "Refill my drink, bitch." A couple of men at the table chuckled under their breath. Not loudly, just enough to let him know they'd heard it. Olivia didn't react. Not to the word, not to the tone. She reached for the bottle with steady hands and poured 2 fingers of amber liquid into his glass. No spill, no tremor. Her expression stayed neutral, almost calm. The billionaire finally turned his head and looked at her properly, as if noticing her face for the first time. "Smile," he added. "It's a celebration." She gave him a polite, minimal nod and shifted to step away. That's when he reached out and caught her wrist. Not violently, but not gently either. The glass tilted slightly in his other hand. "I wasn't done," he said. The music from the quartet drifted softly across the room, but at table 7, the air changed. A few seats down, a retired Army colonel stiffened slightly. Not enough to make a scene, just enough to notice. Olivia looked down at the billionaire's hand around her wrist. Her breathing didn't change. She didn't pull away. She simply said, "Sir, please let go." Her voice was low, even, controlled. That's when something else shifted in the room. Across the ballroom, near the edge of the stage, a tall man in a dark navy suit had been seated quietly beside a small cluster of older officers. His chest carried a modest line of ribbons, silver hair trimmed close, eyes sharp despite the years. A SEAL Admiral. He had been listening to a donor explain tax incentives when his gaze drifted absent-mindedly toward table 7. And then it stopped. The billionaire tightened his grip slightly, irritated by her composure. "You work for tips tonight," he said. "Act like it." A couple of nearby guests exchanged uneasy glances. Olivia met his eyes directly now. There was no fear in them, no anger, just something steady and unreadable. "Sir," she repeated, "please let go." The Admiral across the room leaned forward in his chair. Something about the way she stood, the way she held her shoulders square despite being grabbed, the way her voice didn't rise. It pulled at a memory he couldn't quite place. He narrowed his eyes slightly. because he'd seen that kind of calm before, and not in a ballroom. The billionaire finally released her wrist with a dismissive flick, as if he were bored. "Unbelievable," he muttered, lifting his drink. "You'd think they'd train staff better for events like this." Olivia stepped back, adjusting her sleeve where his fingers had creased the fabric. She didn't look shaken. She didn't look angry. She looked exactly the same as she had before he touched her. And that, more than anything, unsettled him. At the Admiral's table, one of the retired officers noticed his sudden silence. "You all right, sir?" he asked quietly. The Admiral didn't answer. His eyes remained locked on the woman holding the tray. Another guest at table 7 leaned closer to the billionaire. "Easy," he murmured. "There are cameras everywhere." The billionaire smirked. "Good," he replied. "Let them see who's paying for this place." He raised his glass slightly toward Olivia. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated for a fraction of a second. "Olivia," she said simply. The Admiral's hand tightened subtly around the edge of his chair. The name echoed somewhere deeper than memory. Not Olivia. Something else. A call sign. A valley. Dust in the air. He felt his pulse shift, because the posture matched. The voice matched. Even the scar near her wrist, just visible when the billionaire had grabbed her, matched something he hadn't thought about in years. The string quartet paused between songs, and the room filled with low conversation. Olivia turned to leave the table again. This time the billionaire didn't grab her. He only watched her go with mild irritation. But across the room, the Admiral's chair scraped loudly against the marble floor as he stood. Not quickly, not dramatically, just deliberately. Heads turned instinctively. When a man of his rank rises in a room like that, people notice. He didn't look at the billionaire. He didn't look at the guests. He looked only at her. Olivia felt the shift in the room before she saw him. She turned slowly, tray still balanced in her hands. Their eyes met across the ballroom. For a moment, the noise faded into something distant. The Admiral's face drained of color. He took one slow step forward, then another. The men at his table exchanged confused looks, rising halfway out of their seats. The billionaire followed the Admiral's gaze and frowned. "What's this about?" he asked lightly, trying to recover control of the table. But the Admiral didn't answer him. He kept walking until he was only a few feet from Olivia, close enough to see her clearly, close enough to be certain. His voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper. "Angel 6? And the glass in the billionaire's hand stopped halfway to his lips. The name didn't echo loudly, but it carried. Angel 6. The Admiral's voice was controlled, almost careful, yet it seemed to bend the air around them. Olivia didn't answer right away. She didn't correct him. She didn't confirm it either. She just held his gaze, steady and unreadable, tray still balanced in her hands like this was nothing more than another service request. Around them, conversations thinned into whispers. The billionaire at table 7 glanced between them, irritation turning into confusion. "Admiral, everything all right?" he asked with a forced smile, trying to pull the moment back into his control. The Admiral didn't look at him. His eyes stayed on Olivia as if the rest of the ballroom had disappeared. 15 years collapsed into a single second inside the Admiral's mind. A convoy in Helmond, heat thick enough to distort the horizon. The first blast flipping a vehicle like a toy. Radio static screaming in his ear. He remembered shouting coordinates. Remembered the crack of sniper fire from somewhere above the ridge. He remembered the medic crawling toward him while rounds chewed through dust and steel. And he remembered the last thing he saw before blacking out. Blonde hair pulled back tight, eyes calm in the middle of chaos. The official report later said she hadn't made it out. KIA. Body unrecovered, memorial service conducted. He had stood beside a folded flag and told her family she died saving lives. He had believed it. Olivia shifted her weight slightly. "Sir," she said quietly, her voice level, not defensive, not emotional, just grounded. The Admiral's jaw tightened at the sound of it. The same voice, older, softer, but unmistakable. "They told us you were gone," he said under his breath, almost to himself. The billionaire let out an awkward chuckle. "I'm sorry, am I missing something?" he asked. because I believe we were discussing event staffing. A few guests gave nervous smiles, unsure whether to laugh or look away. The Admiral finally turned his head slightly toward him, not fully, just enough to acknowledge his existence. "You were discussing nothing of importance," he replied calmly. Then he looked back at Olivia. "Is it really you?" She didn't answer the question directly. Instead, she lowered the tray onto the edge of the table, freeing her hands. "You should sit down, sir," she said softly. It wasn't a command. It wasn't disrespectful. But it wasn't deferential either. The billionaire frowned. "Excuse me?" he snapped. "You don't tell him what to do." The Admiral raised one hand slightly without breaking eye contact with Olivia, silencing the billionaire without a word. That subtle gesture shifted the balance in the room. The quartet remained quiet. The waitstaff had stopped moving entirely. A few veterans at nearby tables were already standing halfway, trying to piece together what was unfolding. "You pulled me out of that valley," the Admiral said, voice steady but weighted. "You dragged me 20 yards after the second mortar hit." The billionaire's smile faded. "Valley?" he repeated, trying to follow. The Admiral continued as if he hadn't spoken. "You had blood in your eyes and one rifle left." Olivia's gaze didn't waver, but something tightened in her expression. Not fear, not pride, just memory pressing at the edges. "It was my job," she replied. The Admiral shook his head slightly. "No, it wasn't." The room felt smaller, closer, because this wasn't small talk. This was history unfolding in real time. The billionaire cleared his throat loudly. "Admiral, I don't mean to interrupt your reunion, but this is a private event and—" "You put your hands on her," the Admiral said evenly, cutting him off without raising his voice. The sentence didn't sound like an accusation. It sounded like a fact being entered into a record. The billionaire's face flushed faintly. "I asked for service," he said defensively. "She's catering staff." The Admiral finally turned fully toward him now, eyes sharp and unblinking. "She is the reason I am standing in this room tonight," he said. No anger, just clarity. That landed harder than shouting would have. A retired Marine at the next table leaned forward. "Sir, Angel 6, he asked quietly. The Admiral gave a single nod. "Helmand Province, 15 years ago." A ripple moved through the veterans scattered around the ballroom. Some had heard the name in briefings. Some had studied the engagement and leadership courses. Angel 6 had been presented as a sniper-medic hybrid anomaly, a rare operator who held overwatch while treating wounded under fire. The report ended with presumed KIA after the third explosion severed communications. No body recovered, no public citation, classified. The billionaire's confidence cracked visibly. "You're telling me she's some kind of soldier?" he asked, voice thinner now. Olivia met his gaze calmly. "Was," she corrected gently. The Admiral stepped closer to her. "I went to your memorial," he said, his voice lower. "I stood in front of your mother and told her you didn't suffer." The confession carried a weight that pressed into the marble floor beneath them. Olivia's eyes softened, but she didn't look away. "You did what you were supposed to do," she said quietly. The Admiral shook his head once. "No," he replied. "I told them you died in the blast." He swallowed hard. "I didn't know you were still fighting." That sentence shifted something deeper in the room. Because it wasn't just about survival. It was about years of belief built on incomplete truth. The billionaire looked around, realizing the laughter from earlier had vanished completely. No one at his table was smiling now. The retired officers were watching him with a new kind of evaluation. "If this is some sort of misunderstanding," he began carefully, "I'm sure we can—" "There's no misunderstanding," the Admiral said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried authority honed over decades. "You disrespected someone who carried men out of a kill zone while you were writing software contracts." The billionaire's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt again. For the first time that evening, he looked smaller than the room he had funded. Olivia picked up her tray again, as if the moment could return to normal through routine. "This isn't necessary," she said quietly to the Admiral. "It is," he replied. "Because I thought I buried you." Silence rippled outward. A senator near the stage shifted uncomfortably. One of the donors lowered his gaze. The Admiral took a steady breath. "Why didn't you come back?" he asked her. It wasn't accusation. It was something closer to pain. She hesitated for just a fraction of a second before answering. "Because the mission needed a clean ending," she said, "and I was part of that ending." That answer created more questions than it resolved. The Admiral's eyes narrowed slightly. Clean ending meant sealed files, classified reassignment, protective silence. The billionaire blinked rapidly, trying to keep pace with implications he wasn't prepared for. The Admiral looked at him one last time. "You owe her more than a drink," he said evenly. Then he turned back to Olivia. "We need to talk." And the way he said it made it clear this wasn't about memory anymore. If you've ever seen someone underestimated in a room like this and wished someone would stand up for them, comment "stand up" below, because what the Admiral was about to reveal next would change more than just this gala. And as the ballroom doors quietly closed behind them, the billionaire realized the story of Angel 6 was far from finished. The doors to the side corridor closed softly behind them, muting the hum of the ballroom into a distant echo. The Admiral stopped a few steps in, turning to face Olivia fully for the first time without an audience between them. The hallway lighting was softer here, less theatrical. It showed the lines on his face more clearly. It showed the steadiness in hers. For a moment, neither of them spoke. 15 years of unfinished sentences stood between them like something solid. "I carried your name for a long time," he said finally, voice low. "Every time someone asked about Helmond." Olivia held his gaze. "You carried enough," she replied. It wasn't comfort. It wasn't accusation. It was recognition. He studied her carefully, as if confirming she was real and not a memory playing tricks on him. "The third blast took out comms," he said quietly. "After that, everything went dark." She nodded once. "It did." He took a slow breath. "The after-action report listed you as KIA. We searched the valley twice." His jaw tightened. "We didn't find you." Olivia leaned lightly against the wall, arms resting naturally at her sides. "You weren't supposed to," she said. The words were calm, but they landed heavy. The Admiral's eyes narrowed slightly. "What does that mean?" She looked past him briefly, as if seeing the ridge again. "It means the extraction didn't end where you think it did." He waited. She didn't rush. "After you were airlifted, the valley didn't clear," she continued. "The team split to create a diversion. 2 of them couldn't move fast enough." The Admiral's posture stiffened. He remembered the names. He remembered the silence when they were listed. "You stayed," he said quietly. It wasn't a question. She gave the smallest nod. "Someone had to hold overwatch." His throat tightened. "You were hit." "Yes." She didn't elaborate, didn't dramatize it, just acknowledged it. "But the ridge gave me line of sight." The Admiral exhaled slowly, pieces sliding into place. "The additional fire after we lost contact," he murmured. "That was you." She didn't smile. She didn't confirm it proudly. She simply met his eyes. "It bought them time," she said. "Enough to reach the dry creek bed." The Admiral felt something shift in his chest. "They told us enemy fire tapered off because insurgents repositioned," he said. Olivia shook her head gently. "It tapered off because they stopped advancing." The quiet confidence in her tone said everything without embellishment. He closed his eyes for a moment, replaying the tactical map he'd studied 100 times. The kill zone, the ridge, the coordinates that had never fully made sense. "You were still on that ridge when the second team swept through," he realized. "Yes," she said. "And by then, command had already sealed the perimeter." The Admiral's gaze sharpened. "Sealed?" She held it steady. "There were other assets operating that week," she replied carefully. If I came back with the first extraction, it would have raised questions about locations that were never meant to exist. He understood immediately. Overlapping operations, sensitive placements, the kind of layers civilians never hear about. So they left you listed as KIA, he said slowly. She didn't correct him. It simplified the paperwork, she answered. That sentence carried more weight than it appeared to. Simplified meant protected. Protected meant someone had decided the cleanest solution was silence. The Admiral felt a flash of anger, not at her, but at the machinery behind it. You were one of ours, he said quietly. I know, she replied. He stepped closer, lowering his voice further. You could have corrected the record later, he said. You could have come back. Olivia's expression didn't change, but something deeper surfaced in her eyes. And reopen every classified placement tied to that valley? She asked. Pull families back into hearings? Trigger investigations that would expose men still operating? She shook her head once. No. The Admiral studied her face, seeing now what he hadn't allowed himself to see at the memorial. You chose to stay gone, he said. She nodded. It was cleaner. The word echoed faintly in the corridor, heavier now than when she'd used it earlier. He looked down briefly, absorbing that. Your mother, he began. Olivia interrupted gently. She knows I'm alive. His head lifted sharply. She does? Yes. A faint softness entered her voice for the first time. She was told quietly, years later, under confidentiality. He exhaled, relief mixing with lingering guilt. I told her you were brave, he said. You were, Olivia replied. He almost laughed at that, but it caught in his throat. I meant you, he corrected. She gave him the faintest hint of a smile. Brave isn't the right word, she said. Committed is. The Admiral straightened slightly. Why waitress work? He asked, not judgmental, just searching. She glanced back toward the ballroom doors. Because it keeps things simple, she said. People see what they expect to see. He understood. Invisibility can be a form of peace. You deserved recognition, he said quietly. A citation at the very least. She met his eyes evenly. Recognition would have undone the cover, she replied. And those 5 men are raising families right now because that cover held. That stopped him, because he knew exactly which 5 she meant. He'd watched 2 of them receive promotions. He'd shaken hands with another at a retirement ceremony. They had built full lives on top of a mission the world barely knew existed. Back in the ballroom, muted voices began to rise again as guests speculated. The billionaire's laugh, thinner now, drifted faintly through the door before fading. The Admiral's jaw tightened at the sound. He had no idea, he said. Olivia's expression returned to neutral calm. He saw a uniform, she replied, just not the one that mattered. That sentence settled between them with quiet precision. He studied her once more, not as a subordinate, not as a legend, but as a woman who had carried silence longer than most people could carry praise. There's something else, he said slowly. The final transmission before comms cut. She waited. You said, Angel 6 holding. His voice softened. Holding what? She held his gaze for a long second. The line, she answered simply. He felt the weight of that. Holding the line meant staying when retreat would have been easier. It meant absorbing pressure so others could move. It meant choosing obscurity over acknowledgement. He nodded once, a gesture of understanding deeper than rank. You don't owe that man anything, he said quietly. I know, she replied, but he owes himself better. The Admiral let that sink in, because it wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about humiliation. It was about standard, and she had never lowered hers. The ballroom doors shifted slightly as someone approached from the other side. Voices hushed. The Admiral glanced toward the sound, then back at her. When we go back in there, he said carefully, I'm not letting this disappear. Olivia's eyes remained steady. You can't tell the full story, she reminded him. I won't, he replied, but I can tell enough. She considered that for a moment, then gave a small nod. Not permission, just acceptance. And as the doors began to open again, revealing a room full of powerful people waiting for answers, the Admiral realized something else. The story of Angel 6 had never ended in that valley. It had only been paused, and now it was about to resume. The ballroom quieted the moment the Admiral stepped back inside. Conversations didn't stop all at once. They faded, one table at a time, forks lowered, glasses hovered mid-air. The billionaire at table 7 straightened in his chair, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He had been laughing too loudly just seconds earlier, trying to reset the atmosphere, trying to shrink what had just happened into something trivial. But when he saw the Admiral return with Olivia walking beside him, not behind him, the temperature in the room shifted again. She wasn't hiding now, still in her black catering uniform, still holding her tray, still composed, but not invisible anymore. The Admiral stopped near the center of the ballroom, not at the podium, not under the lights, just in open view. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't demand attention. He simply stood there long enough for silence to settle naturally. That kind of silence only happens when the room knows something real is about to be said. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began evenly, "I need a moment. No theatrics, no drama, just authority." The billionaire leaned back, trying to look unbothered. "Admiral," he said lightly, "if this is about earlier, I assure you." "It is," the Admiral replied calmly, cutting him off without force. The room felt smaller. He didn't recount classified details. He didn't expose sealed operations. He didn't name valleys or coordinates, but he told enough. 15 years ago, he said, during an operation that never made headlines, I was pulled from a kill zone by a medic who refused to leave her team behind. He didn't look at Olivia as he spoke. He looked at the guests, at the donors, at the men who funded hardware but never saw the dust. She was listed as killed in action. A murmur rippled softly across the ballroom. I attended her memorial. The billionaire's smile faded completely now. And tonight, the Admiral continued, I watched a man put his hands on her like she was disposable. That line didn't rise in volume, but it landed like a weight dropped onto marble. Olivia remained still beside him. No satisfaction, no pride, just steady breathing. The billionaire cleared his throat. Admiral, I didn't know who she was. The Admiral turned to face him fully now. That's the point, he said. The room went completely silent, because it wasn't about knowing her call sign. It wasn't about knowing her record. It was about how you treat someone when you don't. The billionaire shifted in his seat. He wasn't used to this position. Not publicly, not with donors watching. If I offended you, he began carefully, I apologize. The Admiral didn't respond. He waited. The billionaire looked at Olivia now, not over her, not past her, at her. I apologize, he repeated, this time directly. There was no applause, no dramatic gasp, just attention. Olivia stepped forward slightly, just enough to stand without the Admiral's shadow touching her. I don't need an apology for myself, she said calmly. Her voice carried cleanly across the ballroom. I need you to understand that respect doesn't come with a resume. The billionaire blinked. You shouldn't have to know what someone survived, she continued, to treat them like they matter. That landed deeper than anything the Admiral had said, because it wasn't angry, it was measured. A retired Marine near the back of the room slowly stood, then another. Not dramatically, not in protest, just standing. Within seconds, several veterans scattered through the ballroom were on their feet. No clapping, no shouting, just standing. The billionaire swallowed. For the first time that night, he looked smaller than the uniform she wasn't wearing. The Admiral turned slightly toward Olivia. There was something in his expression now that hadn't been there earlier. Release. For the record, he said evenly, addressing the room again. The citation tied to that operation remains sealed. A few heads nodded in understanding. But the 5 men she held the line for, he continued, are alive today. He paused. And 3 of them are in this room. All eyes scanned the crowd. 3 older men, quiet, unassuming, seated near the side, slowly rose. One had a limp. One had a scar across his temple. One simply stood with both hands folded in front of him. None of them spoke. They didn't need to. The Admiral didn't salute this time. He simply placed his hand briefly over his heart, and one by one, others followed. Not because of rank, not because of ceremony, because of understanding. Olivia stood in the center of it without stepping into the spotlight. She didn't lift her chin higher. She didn't soften. She simply absorbed the moment the same way she absorbed everything else. Quietly. After a long beat, she bent down, picked up her tray, and turned slightly toward the catering station. The billionaire watched her go, not with resentment, not with ego, but with realization. Because the most powerful person in that ballroom hadn't been the one writing checks. It had been the one carrying glasses. The quartet resumed softly, conversations restarted, but differently now, slower, more measured. The Admiral didn't follow her immediately. He watched her return to work, watched her move between tables as if nothing monumental had just happened. He understood something then that most of the room was still processing. Some heroes don't retire. They step back. They disappear on purpose. They choose peace over recognition. As Olivia refilled another glass at a different table, one of the younger staff members leaned toward her quietly. "Was that real?" she whispered. Olivia gave a small, almost amused breath through her nose. "Just a long time ago," she replied. The Admiral finally approached once more, but this time not as a commanding officer, as a man who owed his life. "You held the line," he said quietly, so only she could hear. She met his eyes one last time. "We all did," she answered. He nodded, and then he stepped away. The billionaire remained seated longer than anyone else that night. Not because he had nowhere to go, but because he had something to think about. Olivia finished her shift without ceremony. No headlines, no press, no dramatic exit. Just a woman in a black uniform walking out of a ballroom into the cool night air, invisible again, but never small. And if stories like this remind you that true strength isn't loud, it's steady, that real heroes don't ask to be seen, they simply stand when it matters, then subscribe, and stay with us. Because some of the greatest stories are